Well, hey everyone, once again, we want to welcome you to your Life Group Leader training video. Our passage for this week is Jonah chapter 1. We're beginning a series in Jonah, so if you haven't had time to read chapter 1, in fact, if you haven't had time to really read through the whole story, it's only 4 chapters, I encourage you to go ahead and stop this video, take some time to read through the story, spend some time with the Lord in that story, and then you can return to this video and prepare to lead your group. But once again, our reading for this week is Jonah chapter 1. And for this week, I just want you to sit with this story and really look at what's happening here. The book of Jonah, it's one of the most commonly misinterpreted, misunderstood books in the entire Bible. And interestingly enough, it's one of the more popular stories. The story of Jonah and the whale is one that we tell to our children from the very beginning, and we hear the story over and over again, but often I think we miss the point of the story. And here in chapter 1, we're introduced to a character named Jonah, and it's within the book of the 12, the book of the minor prophets, and so we're expecting something similar to the other books that we read in the book of the 12 and all of the other prophets. But the story of Jonah is different, and it's different for that very fact that it is a story. Most books of prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, Amos, all of these books, they are books that are words from a prophet to a people. Instead, here in the book of Jonah, we find the story of a prophet running from the people that he's supposed to be speaking to. The story begins and God calls Jonah to go to Nineveh, and Jonah responds by going in the exact opposite direction. He heads towards Tarshish, which in this time was the furthest west that anyone could imagine or think of. Nineveh is east and Tarshish is west. And Jonah heads toward Tarshish. He gets on this boat, and we see someone who is adamantly opposed to God's will. God has called Jonah to Nineveh. He gets on a boat. He heads in the opposite direction. While he's on the boat, you guys know the story. The Lord sends a storm to wake Jonah up. He's literally sleeping, but he's also figuratively sleeping. He's sleeping. He doesn't realize what God's plan is and God's will is for his life, and he's running. And so the Lord wakes him up with this storm. There's sailors, they're pagan sailors on the ship, and they prove themselves to be a lot more righteous than Jonah. They are seeking for his good. They're praying to Yahweh. They're offering up sacrifices to Yahweh. And Jonah makes a drastic attempt, his most drastic attempt yet. He is so opposed to doing what God has called him to that he would rather die. And so Jonah says, I know what'll stop the storm. Just throw me into the sea. Now, sometimes we think Jonah's thinking, I'll get thrown into the sea and I'll swim back to shore, but that's not at all what would have happened, right? Jonah choosing to be thrown into the sea is in some ways attempting to commit suicide. That he's saying death is better than going to Nineveh. Death is better than doing what God wants for me. And that's the way chapter 1 ends. And the author of chapter 1, he's making the point absolutely clear that Jonah is willing to do whatever it takes to run from God's plan. And he's running from Nineveh, and we know, and you can read in your leader guide more about the city of Nineveh, that Nineveh, for Jonah and for the audience of the book of Jonah, was the worst of the worst. It was the capital of Assyria. Assyria was the nation that had conquered Israel, that had done horrific things to the people of Israel, and that was currently oppressing Israel. They were the most evil of all evil. And God calls Jonah to go to them, to preach the good news, to preach God's justice, and Jonah runs. Jonah wants to do whatever it takes to stay away from what God has called him to do. And the author makes that clear. And so this week, we just want you to let your group sit with Jonah's disobedience, because we believe that just like Jonah, there are things in our life that God has called us to. And for whatever reason, because of our prejudice, because of our fear, because of our hatred, because of whatever it may be, we're running. We believe that there are things in our life, that there are Ninevehs in our life that we are running from, just like Jonah. And so we want to let your group sit with Jonah's disobedience and to challenge all of us to pursue our Nineveh. That whatever our Nineveh is, if it's the neighbor who lives next door, if it's a calling that God's been placed in our life, maybe a career or something along those lines that we're just afraid from, anything that God has called us to and we are running from, that is a Nineveh in our life. And so this week we want to challenge our groups to, first of all, identify that Nineveh. Second of all, to take one step towards Nineveh. Take one step of obedience towards Nineveh. If the Nineveh is their neighbor, then maybe they need to meet their neighbor this week. Knock on the door, deliver some cookies, whatever that may be. They need to meet that neighbor. If the Nineveh is a calling that God has placed in their life, maybe to take on a new career, or to take up a promotion, or to do something in their workplace, they need to take one step towards obedience. One step towards Nineveh this week. And so that is our main idea. That's our challenge for our groups. We are praying for you, and we will see you soon.